Good day, everyone. Welcome to the event hosted by the Asia Alliance Against Torture. My name is Adawin Aira Anwar. I am part of the Contrast and International Advocacy Division. Today, I will serve as moderator for today's webinar. In today's webinar, the Asia Alliance Against Torture will bring a theme, the role of the youth in protecting civic space in Asia as the linchpin in protecting all human rights. For introductions, civic space is the foundation of any open and democratic society. Citizen and civil society organizations can organize, participate, and communicate seamlessly when civil space is available. Without civic space, they cannot claim their rights and influence the political and social structure around them. The protection of civic space can only happen when the state fulfills its obligation to protect its citizens and respect and facilitate their fundamental rights to association, peaceful assembly, and free expression of views and opinions. These are the three primary rights on which civil society rests. The recognition of these spaces is contained in several national, regional, and international legal instruments. Although various international instruments have protected it, the civic space is under pressure too. In several countries, there are many undue restrictions on the fulfillment of these freedoms. In Asia, civic space is critical in the fight for human rights. Reflecting on the human rights situation in Asia has been a grim experience. Many human rights defenders on the ground experiencing several human rights violations. The youth who have access to a lot of knowledge has a vital role in conducting policy advocacy to ensure the state patterns, structure, and institution work from a human rights perspective. The youth are an essential element in the people's movement to protect civic space from voicing the injustice experienced by vulnerable groups. So, in discussing this matter further, we will discuss it together with two speakers who understand the problem. Our first speaker is Ms. Prakaida Pursaka Samsu, or we can call her Ms. Tian, from Cross Cultural Foundation, Thailand. She will elaborate on what rights a person has regarding a civic space and the instruments that protected it. Hello, Ms. Tian. Thank you for joining our today's webinar.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you guys too. Thank you for the chance.
Our pleasure, Ms. Tian. Our last speaker is Ikhlas Tawazun. He is the coordinator of student affairs of Student Executive Board, Universitas Indonesia. He will elaborate on what can be done by the youth on protecting freedom of speech, assembly, and association, especially in Asia's situation. Hello, Ikhlas. Thank you for joining today's webinar with us.
Hello, Adelawin, and thank you for inviting me because I am very happy to share my thoughts about civic space right now.
Yeah, our pleasure, Ikhlas. For the attendees who want to ask questions for the speakers, you can ask questions in the comment sections. So without further ado, let's welcome our first speaker, Ms. Tian. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Adelwin. I'm going to share my screen because I have prepared my presentation. It is good. Everybody is seeing it.
Yes, I can see the presentation.
Okay. Well, my name is Tian. I'm from Cross Cultural Foundation, Thailand. And as I say, I'm really pleased to be here to present you about the situation of civic space in Thailand, and also some aspects on the role of youth in civic space. I would like to highlight first that the political situation in Thailand has been intense since last year until today, as in many other countries. And there are many factors relating to the long-standing junta government that led to the ongoing protests around the country. For example, the public mistrust for the junta government, who has been in power for 7 years now, and also obviously the COVID-19 pandemic and how our government is handling the issues. Let me briefly pointing out that civic space in Thailand in the sense of physical space or public space where people can go out together to participate or to organize a certain activity to express one opinion is very limited. If we raise the example of recent assemblies in Bangkok, what do we have? We have skywalk at Center Bangkok, as you can see in the photo here, on the streets or eventually on the crossroads. And so the thing is that there are not enough public square or large spaces as in Europe. Simply speaking, I can even give you a short list of places that people can go gathering for political purposes. Moreover, when symbolic places are designated, for example, Prime Minister House or Sanam Luang, the Royal Park, the access to these places will be automatically blocked or enclosed. So anyone approaching the border of, as you can see, the containers, they risk being fired by the rubber bullets, for example. And here I'm showing you a picture of a public square in Zurich, Switzerland. The parking lot was replaced by an underground car park, allowing more space for human activities. And here in South Korea, this is a picture of Gwanghwamun Square reconstruction project plan that won the government competition. You can see that there are plenty of spaces as they put the infrastructure underground. And the reason why I'm showing these examples instead of Thailand, because we don't have these kind of places yet. And I'm not so sure if our government will be kind enough to let us profit of these public squares. Anyway, I would like to discuss some more, some nicer aspects on the situation of civic space in Thailand, how civic space has changed or evolved its platform, probably since the past decades, how internet has become a powerful channel to express one's opinions or views, how it contributes to the issues of civic space under pressure in Thailand. And then after this, I will proceed to the challenges, the problems, or the government responses toward the concept of civic space, freedom of expression, and privacy violation issues. So it is interesting to know that the butterfly effect from the street protests traditionally results in a relatively new movement via online platform. And here I'm showing you two social media platforms, the Twitter and Clubhouse. And the reason why I choose these two examples because these platforms allow people to react quickly when there are any incident, issues, or let's say hot topics in the society. And they are also a participatory platform where everyone is included and invited to express their opinions as well as to design the movement together. For example, the use of hashtag. Hashtag is a powerful tool that can spontaneously raise awareness on a certain issue. And last year, there was one hashtag that I find really interesting, translated as ideas on how to mob, which was on Twitter trends in July. And from this hashtag, there were several creative ideas on the organization of a mob shared via Twitter. And here are some of the real adaptations of the idea that were shared. The first picture on the left, you can see an invitation to join the Hampalo rallies. This reflects the rising of pop culture in the political movement in Thailand, where we communicate our messages through Japanese cartoon that was famous when Thai young adults, for example, myself, were kids. So it could attract a lot of diverse people and was apparently a non-violent and creative way of protest or express one's political opinions. And eventually, some pro-government groups, they commented that this is just a kid playing on the streets. And again, on the second picture on the center, the protesters counteract the comments by organizing another mob called, translated as, we are not just a kid, but we are coquettish, Mr. Government. Coquettish in terms of flirtatious, funny way of protest. And lastly, in the third picture here, we are seeing some posters quoting Sailor Moon cartoon, saying, "In the name of the moon, I will right, wrong, and triumph over the dictatorship." And just to give you some overview to help you understand how there were a lot of protests since the past 2 years. So the data is collected from Amnesty International Thailand and a very informative archival website called Mob Data Thailand. It is updated daily and it collects a lot of data about the political protests in Thailand. So last year, there were organized protests of 779. So in total, for example, 2 times a day. And this year, the data is updated lastly in May 2021. We have already, at least since now we are in August, 621 protests. And from these protests, there are now more than 100 charges against protesters, and more than 20 protests were repressed with police force, meaning that the police are using rubber bullets and tear gases, or eventually the high pressure water truck to, let's say, to remove people from the streets. And next, as you can see in the previous slides, the creativity in designing mobs, it is undeniable that we are seeing youth power, which is very strong in designing how to express their voices. And the youth power is playing a very significant role in policy advocacy. And this year, 2021, we are starting to see how young people step up to the front line of the assemblies. And we estimate that there are around 100 children less than 18 years old. And most of them are even around 13 to 15 years old participating in the protests. And these protests, as I already stated, were often repressed with force, bullets, tear gas. So it is very disturbing to observe the situation. And here's some summary of the mob observation from the week of 16 to 22 August. Just recently, there were 38 children who are arrested during the protests. And at least 4 children are severely injured from rubber bullets, and 3 children are reportedly shot with real bullets. 1 of them is still in coma and unconscious in hospital. So this is why we are really concerned about the civic space situation in decline in Thailand. And in the next slides, I will talk about the challenges, the problems, and the government responses on the restrictions on civic space in Thailand. So I must really talk about the enforcement of spatial law around the country. So the emergency decree. Indeed, around more than 100 countries in the world have declared a state of emergency to counter the pandemic, but normally, there are international standards that we have to respect to ensure a sense of balance and transparency of the power usage by the government. For the case of Thailand, using powers under the emergency decree, the government declared an emergency situation in all areas of Thailand in March last year, 2020, which gives power to the authorities to arrest and detain suspected persons, summon any person they suspect committing a crime, seize materials, issue a search warrant, and issue order to inspect our communication means. And this is not all. This also include the use of military force to assist administrative officials or police officers. Since then, the Thai authorities have enacted 31 regulations under the emergency decree, and some of which are not compliant with Thailand's international human rights law obligations to respect and ensure the right to freedom of expression and information. So I will raise one example, the famous regulation number 29, which prohibits the release, distribution, or dissemination of text messages or information that may instigate fear. And it also grants some new enforcement powers, enhancing their ability to censor online speech and investigate internet users. Last month, in July, here is an example of how the government prosecutes an internet user, and she is even a famous public figure. Her name is Millie, and she is a young famous rapper in Thailand. In July, she was ordered to pay 2,000 baht, approximately $60 as a fine, after confessing to a charge of insulting the Prime Minister online. Another concerning issue is the Vacanization of Law against the protesters and dissented people and eventually human rights defenders. There are 679 prosecuted persons for 344 cases, and there are at least 44 prosecuted children under 18 years old for 43 cases. And this data is collected by Thai Lawyer for Human Rights, and it is lastly updated in May. So we estimated that there will be more cases like this. And the charges used to prosecute these people, for example, the Section 112 or lèse majesté law, Section 116 for sedition, the emergency decree violation, which is widely used, and Section 215 for participating in mob, the Public Assembly Act, the Cleanliness Act, Land Traffic Act, and etc. And I'm listing a series of events that occurred recently that demonstrate the situation of freedom of expression in Thailand. I have chosen three main events that I find really disturbing. Let's just start with the adoption of the NGOs Act by the authorities. So on the NGO Acts, it is important to talk about because I suppose that many of you are the attendants also may be working for an NGOs. And in Thailand, the legislation of the law will have a negative impact on both human rights organizations and usual community groups, such as academic institutions, sports associations, art galleries, or even disaster relief groups that are now working to relieve the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And considering these groups as NPO organizations will make them subject to the law's mandatory registration requirement. And in consequence, some potential criminal prosecutions against these organizations. More problems also concern the falling funding of the NGOs and the privacy violation, as the authorities will have the sole judgment to determine which activities may use funds from international organizations and to conduct surveillance and searches without judicial oversight. And second event, let's say incident, there was a release of a top secret document, and here is the picture of the document. circulated online just at the beginning of this month, which revealed that the Thai government has a watch list of 183 people, including opposition politicians, outspoken democracy activists, including teenagers, and lawyers and journalists. And we really marked that there are 2 young girls of 15 years old included in the list as well. So it is really disturbing. And the third issue I would like to address is the problem of transphobia and LGBTQ community under attacks. From our own experience, Cross-Cultural Foundation, we internally encountered some attacks on social media against our advocacy on gender diversity, as we keep receiving threats and cyberbullying from a group of people. And this does not only apply to us for sure. So I think that this topic deserves a place to discuss here in this panel. And let's talk about the forms of freedom of expression violation that we observed from our partner in the Deep South Thailand. Using power under special laws, especially the martial law, emergency decree, international security law to arrest, detain, torture and enforce disappearance, and committing incommunicado detention and special prosecution. Just to give you some little context, the 3 provinces situated in the southern border of Thailand, the people there are living under these 3 special laws since at least 15 years already. So yeah. Next, the media censorship, of course, so limiting the contents that can be published by media, harassing dissented people, Tadika teachers or Muslim religious school teachers, activists, human rights defenders, some official and media by arresting, force collecting DNA and information operation. The prosecution of human rights defender, journalists, victim of torture, as I already talked about, visiting former detainees and family members' houses or school. And next topic on the privacy and personal information violation. Here are some methods that the security-related operation officers collect data from people that they suspect. So census data, remove the suspect's name from his or her house registration and put in central house registration with a remark under arrest warrants. So this information can be accessed by the authorities across the country. And forced DNA collection, SIM card registration with double facial recognition authentication, monitoring bank accounts of Muslim religious school, car and motorcycle registration process that was renewed in order to collect the data of the people that without any evidence are suspected. The problems of these methods rely on the fact that there is no consensual principles and there's no rules of collected data usage. Who know what they are going to use the data for? And Cross-Cultural Foundation, in our experiences, we have documented the use of these collected data in criminal prosecution and with investigation under special laws. So this is actually the end of my presentation, and thank you very much for listening. And okay, please continue.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tian, for the very insightful explanation regarding the situation in Thailand. It is pretty concerning from what I heard from your explanation. Okay, next, let's welcome the last speaker. Ikhlas, the floor is yours.
Okay, could you please share my presentation? Okay, is it shared yet?
Not yet. I will tell the operator. Sorry, we have some difficulties. Let me
Okay.
let me call the operator first.
Okay, or maybe I should just try present it myself.
Okay, sorry for the problems.
Okay, is it visible right now?
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay. Uh, Hi everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunities to Asian Alliance Against Torture. And I am also happy for the great presentation from Ms. Tian, who have given a specific, rather specific overview and detailed about the civic space condition in Thailand, along with all the data and the statistics, which really helps. And in my presentation, I would present a rather broad view, a general overview, and a theoretical one of a civic space and the role of youth in protecting it. Okay, let's start. Next slide, please. Oh, it's mine. Okay, so I'd rather start not from the term civic space, but more basic theoretical examination, that is public sphere. So the public sphere, according to Jürgen Habermas, a German philosopher in 1962, is a virtual or imaginary community which does not necessarily exist in any identifiable space. So it's not just the streets, it's not just the classroom, it's not just the Instagram or Twitter, but it's basically everywhere because it is not limited by space. And it is made up of private people gathered together as a public and articulating the needs of society with the state. So a public sphere is existed to articulate what the society needs, what is the people demand with the state, because there is no just singular political participation that is can to be done through public sphere. Okay, so why is the public sphere important? The notion of public sphere in and of itself exists in relation to the sphere of public authority. So the public sphere exists outside the public authority. It is not involved in the government. It's not the sphere of laws. It is not regulated by authorities, by governments. And as the public sphere is neither a place for authority or market power where you buy and sell things, the only existing relation in public sphere is discursive relations. So many discourse created by the public can take place in the public sphere and then articulate what is needed by the people to the state. Through the public sphere, the public opinions take form in many forms. Like if we wanted some subsidies and if we wanted some improvement in our lives, it is took in a form of public opinion, which then we sounded to the state to put it in touch with the needs of the society. Thus, the public space is very important, so that robust and protected civic space is the cornerstone of an accountable, responsive, democratic governance and stable societies. It is a pretty modern phenomenon, but it is found everywhere, almost everywhere, in modern societies and in modern nation states. Departing from the concept of public sphere, then is founded the concept of civic space, which is a more legal definition of public sphere, which is defined by Civicus, a non-governmental organization, kind of alliance of civil societies around the globe, who defines a civic space as a place, physical, virtual, and legal, where people exercise their rights to freedom of association, expression, and peaceful assembly by forming associations, speaking out in public on public issues of concern, and by gathering together in online and offline forms. And by participating in public decision making, individuals use civic space to solve problems and improve lives. Now, this is the general known concept in the world and is widely recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and other international treaty, as well as Asian Declaration on Human Rights. Sadly, the civic space is not as universally respected as it is universally recognized. Because all states, the tendency of all states, no matter whether it's in Europe, either it's in Asia, or even it's Africa, is that states are keen to limit the public sphere, or worse, making it non-existent. Because the space view the public sphere as the one who is being critical to them, the one who is keep on criticizing them and possibly might topple them. Because and that is why the state is the primary enemy, but also paradoxically might be the protector of the public sphere. Okay, so the Civicus make some kind of rating for civic spaces in countries all around the world, which is divided to 5 categories. The first is open. A civic space in a country is categorized as open when the state is actively enabling and safeguarding the civic space. So the civic space is not taken for granted by the state and by the people. It is being actively enabled and safeguarded to enable critics and meaningful input to the government. The second category is narrow. It is when the rights, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of expression is not necessarily outlawed, but is facing some kind of hindrance. So it is a little bit harder to express yourself freely in the civic sphere. The third category is obstructed, where there is a real imposed legal and practical constraints on civic space. There is a limitation of freedom of speech, that there is an attack on protesters, but at the same time, it's still happening. The expression, the protest, and the assembly is still happening, but just not peacefully, and it's obstructed actively by the state. The fourth category is repressed. A civic space is categorized as repressed when civic space is significantly constrained, overtly and covertly. So the state doesn't just actively attacking the civic space, it is limiting its expression. It is limiting its space to be expressed, and it is making it very, very hard for the people, for everyone involved in the civic space, to have any meaningful discussion, to have any meaningful discourse, because everything is controlled by the state. And the last and worst category is closed, where civic space is virtually non-existent in law and in practice. So the state itself outlaw the civic space. There is nothing outside the state, and everything that is being discussed, everything that is every discourse is the discourse of the state, is in the realm of the state. Now, and sadly, most of Asia belongs in either obstructed or repressed category, as Indonesia itself is categorized as a country with an obstructed civic space. Some worse off is even categorized as closed, such as China. And only one country in Asia is categorized to have an open civic space, which is Taiwan, the only one, which is very, very concerning for us all. Okay, so this is how state limits public sphere. The first one and the most common one is restrictive laws. So states often pass restrictive laws on civil and political rights. So they cannot assemble as easy as they used to be. They cannot express their political views. They cannot assemble. They cannot basically be critical to the government and having a discourse that might be different, a dissent from the government. The second one is criminalization. Because of the restrictive laws or many of unrelated laws, the state uses it to criminalize those who express their views, those who do assembles, and those who do criticize the state. They can criminalize it through the restrictive laws that is directly targeted to the freedom of speech, or maybe to other unrelated laws, such as the laws of pandemic, the laws of public health, and etc. The third is physical repression. So sometimes when protests takes place, when there are demonstrators everywhere, the police or maybe even the military is hands-on involved in the protest and actively repressing the demonstrators. This is widely practiced even before the 21st century to repress freedom of expression, to repress assembly, and to repress demonstrators all over the world who was basically just delivering what they are needing and which is the demand of the people. The fourth is virtual repression, which is relatively new, only exists after the founding of internet, but is a very, very various in forms. The most widest form of virtual repression might be internet shutdowns, which is become increasingly common in Asian states, because in Indonesia it might just happen once or twice, but in India it can happen 100 times, more than 100 times a year, which is very, very concerning because it limits the internet, which is arguably the freest medium of expression available right now. And the last, the state might even try to intimidate you, to harass, or even to kill you. This is not an overreacting, but there is credible evidence that a lot of activists, a lot of youth who express their opinions is intimidated by the state, is harassed up to their friends and families, and even threatened to be killed. In fact, some human rights activists are found dead with not conclusive evidence. Okay, so I'm here to brought a very recent study case in Indonesia, which is seems simple but also compelling. We know that the streets, not just in Jakarta, but in many cities in the world, are fulfilled by murals about culture, murals about daily life, and murals are free. Murals are about everything the society wanted to express. But some murals are found to be satirical and critical to the government, and it has came viral recently in Indonesia. And shockingly, state officials are quick to respond to this. They dislike the critic, they dislike the satire in the murals, so they then erase the murals. They got onto that site and they just paint it white, they just paint it black, just to cover the mural, just to cover the critics that is in the mural. Furthermore, some creators of the murals are even being searched and threatened with criminal charges by the police. This is very concerning because mural isn't even a criminal act, not in the national law, not in the provincial law, but just because it is considered satirical, it is considered critical to the current government, then it is being repressed actively by state officials. Yet the hostile actions against the murals has also sparked outrage from the Indonesian society as wide and counterproductive results, such as a campaign to make new murals to that the winner is the first to be erased by the government. That is the kind of counterproductive result that the repressive government could take because of their reactive actions. And that is just a simple but illuminating example from some civic spaces. But in the larger context, in Asia, in recent years, the protests have erupted all over the continent. We have the Hong Kong democracy movement, we have the protest in Thailand, we have the protest in Myanmar, and we have also the protest in Indonesia in 2019 that reformasi korupsi that continued all to 2020 and even 2021. These are genuine protests that is being delivered by the people, that is there is something truly concerning about their rights, about their civil, their political, and their economic rights, which is currently being oppressed by the state. But sadly, the state then didn't even consider the protest as legitimate and sometimes enable gross human rights violations, as we've seen, which Ms. Tai mentioned, that hundreds of people being arrested, even some killed. And that is very, very concerning to the condition of the civic space in Asia. Other than that, restrictive laws has also been passed. The newest one is the Hong Kong National Security Law, which really outlaws anything of dissent by the media, by the people, and anything circulating in the civic sphere to be expressed, practically closing the civic space in Hong Kong. There are also other laws already in place even before 2010, such as in Indonesia, there is Information Technology and Electronic Transaction, or UU ITE as we call it here, which can basically outlaw anything on the internet. There is, in the Philippines, there are Human Security Act, and in Thailand, there are a lot of examples already mentioned by Ms. Tian. And this is in combination, it is putting a more unfavorable legal view of civic space. So the civic space, again, in Asia is becoming increasingly repressed and increasingly disabled by the governments. So the next topic is why youth? Because the youth, is aforementioned before, plays a significant role, a central role in protecting civic space. Why? Because the youth are uniquely placed to protect the civic space, because it is an educated and privileged group. We are commonly at least high school or even college educated, and we are not yet incorporated to the larger capitalistic system. We are not yet working. We are not yet burdened with daily and monthly expenses. And then we can express our views more freely. We can express our will more freely. And the youth is also, in this current era, is an internet literate generation. With the internet as the most freest medium available, they are very fluent in using the digital content to express their views, to critique the government, and to express anything of concern. And lastly, it was born with freedom and or highly value civil and political freedoms. This is on the contrary with the later generations, which maybe experienced oppression during the 80s and the 90s, which is widespread in Asia, and sometimes just justify, oh, we don't have to take on the streets, oh, we just take if we are repressed. The youth are a different breed. They are currently aware of their civil rights. They are currently aware of their freedoms of expression, freedom of assembly, and is determined to go for it, to go to the streets to defend it. In a larger social context, the youth doesn't just act as a singular power. The youth organizes itself in many, many forms to student executive bodies, such as myself, which exists in many of universities in Indonesia and all over Asia, is actively criticizing not just the campus governance, but the national and international governments. Also, NGOs such as Contrast, who has facilitated this discussion, and various LBH and other issue-specific NGOs, which in some all is going together for protecting the civic space, and other mass organization, which I cannot mention all of it, but they are in the common ground in protecting the civic space. And lastly, it is actively networking. So the youth doesn't consider themselves as individualistic or very class limited. They didn't just socialize among middle class metropolitan youth, yeah, such as myself, but also try to widen their network to the workers, to the farmers, to everyone is currently being repressed by the government, to everyone that is being denied the rights by the state officials. So they can come together as a society, because the public sphere, the civic space itself, is not limited to just one particular group, but to every and each of us, so that we can all participate in protecting our civil liberties and our civic spaces. Okay, as a closing statement from me, we know that resistance may not always work. Resistance sometimes fail. We saw the Hong Kong democracy movement now succumb to the Chinese government, to the national security law. They are being chased away. They are being arrested. And the same picture applies to many of our counterparts in the Thailand, in Myanmar, and all over Asia. But we must know, and we must put it in our hearts, that it is our political responsibility to preserve the civic space. It is our space. It is our medium of expression. It is our medium of delivering concern to the state. But it is not just limited to us to protect it. We must hold the state accountable to safeguarding it. The state doesn't have to be the enemy of the civic space, but the state also have to safeguard the civic space actively. Okay, that's all from me. I give it back to Adelwin.
Okay, thank you, Ikhlas, for the very insightful explanation regarding the role of the youth in protecting civic space, especially in Asia situations. All right, next we will enter the question and answer session between the audience and the speaker. We already have several questions from the attendees. Let me read it for the speakers. Okay, first we have the question from Nadia. So Nadia has dropped the question. She said that some say that the weaponization of law is inevitable, but what do you think is the best strategy to tackle this? As there are many people that justifies their weaponization of law under the argument of, but that's what the law says, and we must implement it, and etc. This issue is really concerning, and thank you for your presentation. I think Ms. Tian can answer this question.
Okay. This is a good question, and which is also difficult to answer. From my own experience and personally, I think that there are many levels to tackle these issues. We can start by advocating against it. And so actually there are already protests on the street and arguments spread online. And so the smallest thing I think that we can do is that never stop spreading word news and on the issues. And next, another thing that I think that it helps a lot is raising awareness and creating more knowledge on human rights. Since from my work's experience, when we talk to youth who are prosecuted, if they are, let's say, equipped with knowledge on international principles, human rights, they tend to feel that it can weaken the weaponization of law. And it can also go until the question of if it's possible to reform the constitution or some law. So this is also the work of politicians, and if they are open enough to listen to our voices, it would be possible one day. Not sure if it's a good answer enough. Iklas can help me as well.
Okay, Ms. Tian has provided a good answer, and I just probably going to add a little bit. It is right that first thing first, we have to advocate specifically against a law that is or maybe probably is gonna be weaponized against the civic space. And then we have to spread the knowledge that it is your right. It is currently your right that are being threatened. It is your civil and social political rights that should not be limited by the state. But more than that, I think we should empower the people so they know that we are not just a passive people that just accept whatever the government legislates, but we can form the law ourselves. We must take onto the streets. We must post protests against the government. We must know that we are capable on forming the law, on forming what we want and what we want to protect.
All right, we move to the next questions. We have questions from the phone. So the question is, what are the challenges to the youth movement in protecting civic space? As we know that many of the youth have decided to be apolitical, so they have decided to not joining the movement or other organizations or networking. Okay, the question is for Iklas. Can you explain? Can you answer the question, please?
Okay, so how can the youth protect more civic space as some of it became kind of apolitical? It is a reality that we found right now because some of the youth, view politics as dirty and ununderstandable, unpractical, and they don't want to necessarily involve in it. Well, first thing first, we have to tell them that it is their rights that are currently being under attack. They may not realize it on the first occasion, because they sometimes feel, oh, this is not my thing. It is unrelated to me. But we have to know that a national law will affect everything, will affect all the people in it. And if you let just one legislation, one law, and one act of repression being done to the civic space, it will again continue, and it will be wider, it will be bigger, and it will threaten not just the people that you don't care about, it might even threaten yourself. So that is what we need to make all the youth realize, that it's in all of our interest to protect the civic space.
Okay, for Ms. Tian, you can, if you want to add some explanations towards the question.
About the challenges of youth movement protecting the civic space rights, if I'm not wrong. So there is the weaponization of law against the youth. So, well, I think that since I presented that there are many young, really young, 13, 14 years old people and who are prosecuted, I think that another issue for me is since they are young people, they are more sensitive toward being prosecuted criminally or to experience this kind of police repression. They are losing that time of being young, of being in, they are losing their youth. So I think that maybe in the next future, another challenge is how could we rehabilitate this group of people. So yeah, this is what I would like to add specifically.
Okay, thank you. We will move to the next questions. We have a question from Rudy. The question is for both speakers. Rudy asked what can be done, especially for the youth, to support the public sphere. As we know today, we can we the youth can be prohibited from expressing their opinion in public. As Ikhlas said before that, we can be jailed for creating murals.
First of all, when we talk about youth, meaning a group of young people of a certain age, and as I talked with a lawyer or a human rights worker, he told me that a lot of young people less than 18 years old, they don't really know about the legal safeguards. For example, when they are arrested, the police took their telephone and they cannot contact their parents and they are inaccessible. So if you are working in human rights NGOs or you are a parent or you can support them by giving more knowledge on what to do in a mob, in a protest, what to expect, and support them like this, and to give some recommendations to them as a support and not restrict them not to go on streets or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, in my point of view, even when there are obstacles, there are threats to freedom of expression, to civic space, which yeah, factually exists in many countries. If we just sit there and if we just accept the repression, the restrictive laws as just, then we are not going anywhere. In fact, we are going backwards in protecting the civic space. We have to, well, not straightly openly opposing the law, but we have to, yeah, you know, everything from the basic things, from creating kind of murals to openly protesting and demonstrating the law, it is all justifiable, because we have to know that the law, the restriction on freedom of speech, on freedom of assembly, is not just because we just not accept the law as it is. We have to bring the law that we want. We have to create the law that is just and protects civic space.
Okay, we will move to the next questions. We have questions from Pan. Is there any gender bias in the youth movement, both in Thailand and Indonesia?
Who's gonna answer this first?
Ikhlas, can you elaborate the terms gender bias? I'm not sure whether I understand it well.
Okay, I'm afraid if it's just me, I'm not well put to answer this question, but thankfully there is also Mrs. Tian. Okay, so in my point of view, there might be some gender bias in the youth movement because yeah, still there is a structure of organization, and yes, sometimes there are a few that the more proper person to lead an organization or to lead a demonstration is men, and usually, and the most participating people in a demonstration is also men. But I see optimistically that further down the road there will be more inclusive organizations. We don't know. We don't have to limit the participation of demonstration to men, and furthermore, we have now internet, we have now Instagram, Twitter, and everything, which of course doesn't limit political participation just to men. So there is some bias right now, but hopefully it will decline by the time.
Yeah. So for Thailand, there is let's say not balanced proportion of between female protest leader and male protest leaders. It is true that there are more men than women in leading the movement. And Miss Ponpen asked more on sexual harassment. Yeah, actually, I just want to talk about how the authorities are dealing with female protesters. This is also concerning because it is not, let's say, women and men, they should be, the police should respect and implement or even establish new regulations to deal with women, especially because they are also vulnerable group and they need more another treatment than men. And yes, with the internet and the digital era, I feel that there is more equality in terms of expressing opinions. But whether the voice of female or the voice of male or the different of gender, whether their voices are heard differently, I'm not sure if I can answer that.
Okay. Maybe I want to add the explanation from my experience during the protests from my experience. As far as I know that in Indonesia, that during demonstrations, there is some gender bias, such as like the role of men protecting women during demonstration, or even there are some sexual or verbal harassments towards women. It is from my experience during last year demonstrations or others. Okay, we will move to the next questions from May. What do you think about democracy in 20 years later, when millennial or even Gen Z can take a lead?
In the next 20 years, in the future, right?
In the future.
Well, in my opinion, I think there are hope as we are seeing new generation rising up and speaking out and coming out to express their voices. And I think that it is a good sign. And in 20 years, I'm hoping to see every country more democratic and more human rights perspective. And yeah, I think I'm hopeful toward the next 20 years in the future.
Okay, from me, sadly, I don't really share the same overview like Ms. Tian, because in the Indonesian experience, sometimes when there are kind of a generation of protest in the 1966 and 1998, there are a generation of activists, generation of students and people who are protesting against the government. But like then 10 15 years later, they doesn't share the same idealism as they are like 20 years ago. They are then like co-opted into the system. They are part of the repression. They are part of the human rights violation. And that is sometimes sad here, because then we cannot really keep the momentum of movement. We cannot really share the same ideals with those who are protesting in the past. So yeah, I just hope that those will lead later on, the students, the youth right now, will still be able to keep their idealism, will still be able to protect the civic space and the human rights as they are doing right now.
Okay. I think that is the last question from our Q&A session between the audience and the speaker. So, as your moderator, let me summarize our discussion today. F- from Ms. Tian, she said that some countries such as Thailand do not have adequate civic space. Online civic space is a powerful tool that can raise awareness on a certain issue, both through social media, satirical images, and others. In Thailand alone, thousands of protests have taken place and many charges have been imposed on citizens, including the youth. There are also many national regulations that limit civic space. In discussing freedom of expression, there are several problems such as abuse of law, media censorship, prosecution, and others. There are also problems with privacy and personal information. From the explanation from Ikhlas, he said that public sphere is not limited. Through the public sphere, public opinions take form and it puts the state in touch with the needs of society. Then from the public sphere, we can more specifically refer to civic space, which is the role of the state in protecting it. Unfortunately, they can become enemies of the civic space. There are several ranks in the civic space, namely open, narrow, obstructed, repressed, and closed. The state, in carrying out restriction related to the public sphere, does so with restrictive laws, criminalization, physical repression, virtual repression, and intimidation, harassment, or even homicide. Several forms of movement spread across Asia, but however, the restriction imposed by the state are also experienced by many human rights defenders. So the youth has an important role in protecting the civic space because it has various privileges such as high education and high literacy and has a broad freedom such as in forming organization and networking. Okay, I think that's our discussion for today. Thank you for speakers and attendees for attending the webinar. I hope this webinar will be useful in the future in understanding the civic space, especially in Asia situation. Thank you, Ikhlas. Thank you, Ms. Dian.